So I want to just kind of give highlights in many ways of the history of civil rights photography from 1954 to 1968, because I'm going to argue that's when it really starts, really in 54. And we could have a mark in 68. Of course, the journey continues. The journey never ends. We see ourselves presently in a moment of really wrestling with still trying to secure civil rights in this country. On the opening page, you see Moneta Sleet in the upper left, and then in the middle, you see the person with the camera around his neck is Charles Moore, and then Gordon Parks, three of the superstars of the civil rights era of photography. And we'll just give some highlights of this to introduce this topic to you. So I want to start with this quote from Moneta Sleet. Two things here. One, you see him with his camera. Two, the image on the right is an image of Coretta Scott King and her youngest of four children at the funeral of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And for this image, Moneta Sleet won the Pulitzer Prize. Listen to what he says. He says, during the civil rights movement, I was a participant just like everybody else. I just happened to be there with my camera. And I felt and firmly believed that my mission was to photograph and show the side of it that was the right side. And the reason I start with this quote, one is Moneta Sleet is one of the greatest photographers of all time, and many times history has not given him his due. He was primarily an ebony and jet photographer, the equivalent to what was then famous magazines called Life, but Ebony and Jet was the famous magazine in the African-American community. And he primarily photographed for them, but this image was a critical image. And the story behind the image is that as they were preparing for the funeral, Coretta Scott King found that there were no African-American photographers who had press passes to take images of the funeral. And she said, well, if Moneta Sleet doesn't take pictures, no one takes pictures. So what you find, for many of these photographers of this era, they were connected to the movement. They saw themselves as part of the movement, and were very intimately connected with those persons who were leading the movement, as was Moneta Sleet. He was really close to the King family, took a lot of personal images of them as well. Lee Rayford, in her modern classic text entitled Imprisoned in Luminous Glare, Photography in the African-American Freedom Struggle, Lee Rayford kind of charts this piece of kind of what these images meant and how the images were used in the struggle. And a quote that the title of the book comes out of a book written by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The book is entitled Why We Can't Wait. The book was written in 1964. Let me read this quote to you that Dr. King wrote. Dr. King said, and I quote, "The brutality with which officials would have quelled the black individual became impotent when it could not be pursued with stealth and remain unobserved. It was caught as a fugitive from a penitentiary is often caught in gigantic circling spotlights. It was imprisoned in a luminous glare, revealing the naked truth to the whole world." And that's critical, because what King understood and what the movement understood, that what was happening in the Jim Crow South, and it happened since the end of slavery, had been going on. But for some reason, what was happening, the world was not seeing. But what King and those understood was photography was a way to make the world stop and look. Not so much the moving image, but the still image. Because the still image does just that. It makes you stop. You can't go to the next frame. In the moving image, you go to the next frame, but the still image, you have to stop. And so they understood the power of the still image. And it's the still image that both births the movement, it's the still image that sustains the movement, and it's the still image that moves America to see itself in the mirror, confess its sins of racism, its evils of segregation, and change. And without being caught in what King called a luminous glare, this change never, ever occurs, I believe. So where does it start? It starts in 1955. A woman by the name of Mamie Till. Mamie Till lived in Chicago, but she was from Money, Mississippi. Her son Emmett Till was born and raised in Chicago, and she wanted her son to go down south and spend some time with his cousins to get to know his folk in the South, her people. And he was murdered, brutally murdered, August 28th, 1955. And the courage of Mamie Till, the vision of Mamie Till to use still images changed the conversation. I'm going to show you a brief clip that features the photographer who took the images that I believe birthed the movement and begins to change what we know as America in the 1950s and 1960s. There are some very disturbing images, so just want to alert you to that if you have problems with that, just to be cautious of that. About a 5-minute clip. Let's watch this clip, and then we'll come back and have conversation around the clip. Here we go.
I believe that the whole United States is mourning with me. And if the death of my son can mean something to the other unfortunate people all over the world, then for him to have died a hero would mean more to me than for him just to have died.
Emmett Till, 14, was kidnapped and killed allegedly for wolf whistling at the wife of accused Roy Bryant.
It's not just that they discover his body and that he's been killed. He has been brutally, brutally beaten. As a criminal defense attorney, when we look at crimes, we often try to put together a picture about what happened, and it takes a lot of hatred and a lot of rage to do the kind of violence that was done to Emmett Till. Being a black boy in the American South could be quite perilous. The allegation that Emmett Till was being social with a white woman was considered an affront, a threat to the racial order. And I think the shock of his death was compounded by the brutality of his death. Emmett's mother couldn't actually conform to the conventions of the time, and she did something really quite remarkable. She made the really unorthodox choice of having a funeral with an open casket that was going to be very widely publicized, that was going to be attended by the national press. She wanted civil rights leaders and political leaders to see what they did to her child. She invited David Jackson and Jet magazine to take pictures of this child's battered body. And these images were widely circulated. Jet magazine was a publication that was primarily produced and distributed to the African American community that had been trying to educate the rest of the country about the horrors of segregation and racial violence and lynching in the American South. And the images were really, really challenging. It was the kind of visual that you didn't typically see. You certainly didn't see it outside of a war zone, and you certainly didn't see it with children. His face was grotesque. You could see eyes, but you couldn't really distinguish all of his facial features. That's how much violence he had been subjected to. Emmett's mother's presence in the photo is really important because she's really giving witness to victimization and violence. The other images that Emmett's mother provided just created this notion of a very respectable young boy who was trying to make the very best impression on everyone he met. The juxtaposition of a little boy in a suit and a tie with his battered face was a stark image that made it really impossible for anyone who saw it to be silent about it. Mainstream publications like Look and Life began talking about this issue. It became an issue that elected officials were being questioned about. These images made it impossible for white families in other parts of the country to stay indifferent, to stay neutral.
Never has this quiet little cotton-growing community of Mississippi seen so much publicity and so much excitement as in the past few days. Nearly 200 of the town's 500 or 600 residents have packed into the courthouse to hear the day's proceedings.
Do you have any evidence bearing on this case?
I do know that this is my son.
How long do you expect to be here?
Until the trial is over.
Bryant and his half-brother, J.W. Milam, were acquitted by this jury. And subsequently, even though they admitted taking the boy from the house, they were freed of kidnap charges.
The inability to hold anyone accountable for his murder and the comfort with which the men who killed him were able to talk about the violence was just adding to the injury. They weren't just killing a boy. They're expressing something rooted in this decades of animosity and fear and anger.
A boy, a 14-year-old boy, was killed brutally. And one of our objectives here is to see to it that that boy whose picture you see there does not die an inconspicuous death, and that his case will be remembered and something will be done about it.
These images became powerful forces in organizing a new level of commitment and resistance. The brutal murder of Emmett Till really pushed Rosa Parks to a deeper level of activism. That was one of the motivating forces behind her choice.
So Rosa Parks is reported to have said that when she didn't get up out of that seat on that bus, she says, "I couldn't get the picture of that boy out of my mind." So Emmett Till's decision to share these images inspired Rosa Parks not to get up. So David Jackson, the photographer, the jet photographer that Emmett Till has the wisdom to invite to take these images. And I want you to pause and think about the courage it took for her to do that when her son had been murdered, brutally murdered. And they wanted to have a funeral quickly in Money, Mississippi and bury him. She says, "No, ship my son's body back to Chicago. I want the world to see what they did to my boy." And then she courageously receives the body. This is the image that David Jackson takes when the body returns to Chicago. Before she actually sees it, she's first receiving the body. And what do you see in this image? You see the pain of a mother who's done nothing but send her son down south on summer vacation to be returned, beaten, battered, and brutally murdered. But she has the courage to receive the body and the wisdom to use still photography to make America look. This image, where she is caught there looking at this body, as the speaker said, witnessing victimization. But I also want you to see the other image on the right, where you see Emmett Till's battered body. Then you see this image from the family photo album. You heard a lot about that in Through a Lens Darkly. The family archive. She sources the family archive. And what she does is she brilliantly juxtaposes the family images of this boy with what racism and what segregation did to his body, what America has allowed to go on for centuries. Because you know, post-Civil War, when they removed the troops from the South, Jim Crow takes place. And black folk are lynched each and every day. This was a normal occurrence. But this time, you got to look at it. Because the images are in Jet, the images are in Life, the images are in Look, the images that David Jackson takes, and then the family archive. You see this woman's boy. You see him. And then you got to then connect not just with the son, but also the mother. And she's brilliant in this move. But what it does, it makes America look. It bursts the movement. It makes Rosa Parks think in a more deliberate way. And then Ernest Withers, who has a interesting story, a photographer out of Memphis, Tennessee. Ernest Withers takes it one step further. He takes images, collects images, and publishes a complete photo story of the Till murder case and sells it for $1. And these little pamphlets go around the country. So you have the Jet publication, you have Life, you have Look, and then you have Ernest Withers' work as well to begin to publish this story. So once again, these are photographers committed to this struggle who are going to tell this story and make America look and change the conversation. So you see this Associated Press image taken on February 22nd. Now remember, Rosa Parks was arrested on December 1st, 1955. Emmett Till, August 1955. So August, December. Why are we in February? Because when they are arrested, they refuse to pay the $16 fine. So then they when they go to court, they don't pay the fine. They're therefore then booked and indicted by a grand jury. And look at the image. Here you see this seamstress, this upright, upstanding, mild-mannered black woman being arrested. Once again, making America look. This brings us to Charles Moore, because you know Rosa Parks is in Montgomery, Alabama. Charles Moore, the photographer here on the right, is a photographer in Montgomery, Alabama. He goes to King's Church and hears King preach, falls in love with the King and the movement, commits himself to documenting the movement. He asked to be assigned to these stories. We're going to come back to him as well. So when King is arrested for sitting into a courtroom trying to be with his friend Rabbi Abernathy, Charles Moore is there. Charles Moore captures this image. And remember, one thing about the movement that was important, look how Dr. King is dressed. A big thing that we had to do in the 50s and 60s was prove that we were human, prove that we were civil, prove that we were upright, prove that we had intelligence and were articulate and were respectable citizens. So you always see them dressed in suits and ties. And Charles Moore captures this image of this defenseless young king, 25 years old, being arrested. So while all this is going on, 1955, 1956, then here comes Gordon Parks, who had established himself as a great photographer from the FSA and now working for the most popular magazine in the country, and if not the world, Life magazine. And listen to what Gordon Parks says. He says, I picked up a camera because it was my choice of weapons against what I hated most about the universe: racism, intolerance, and poverty. And what I don't want you to miss is the motivation behind these photographers' work. They are organically connected to this work. They see themselves using their work, the beauty, the aesthetics of powerful photography, to change the conversation, to change the narrative, to change the nation, to move the needle towards justice. So they're intentional about their work. They're not on assignment. They're not innocent bystanders. They are active participants in the movement. So while all this is going on in Montgomery, Alabama, Gordon Parks, in Life magazine on September 24th, 1956, publishes this major photo piece with a great story entitled Segregation in the South. And in this piece, Parks shows the world what it's like to be poor, to be middle class, to be wealthy. But if you are black in the South, you still are subjected to the evils and the vicious treatment of segregation. Look at this image. Beautifully, wonderfully dressed, classy black folk who have to be humiliated by going in what's called a colored entrance. And he's using color, not black and white, which is interesting because I think it gives the images more depth. And you see in the distant, way back, as the African American woman in the foreground of the frame, in the bluish dress, the little girl in white. If you look way back, there's this white woman in a red dress. So look at the contrast of images: the blue, the red, and the white. Did I just say red, white, and blue? Oh, that's right, I did. That's the color of the flag. But look how he captures that. And he shows the indignities of a dignified people having to experience life in the South. Look how he uses color in the second image. Something as simple as going and getting ice cream. Once again, he has that color palette, doesn't he? The red, the white, and the blue. But in this image, he shows you how ironic and how insidious and senseless this thing is. Here you have the white window to get ice cream, and just right around the corner, the colored. So he's showing the indignities, the humiliation black folk are experiencing in the South. He's showing what it is to live in this space. Matter of fact, one of the families that were highlighted in this piece had to leave the city because their lives were threatened. He shows the poverty. He shows the legacy of slavery that manifests itself in Jim Crow. No matter how hard you work, you cannot escape the vicious social, economic, demographic realities of being black in a segregated South. Beautiful color palette. Here, black children looking almost imprisoned as they're gazing upon white children enjoying fun time in a park that the black children are not allowed to play in simply because they're black. Look at the depth of the image, the foreground, the middle ground, the background, the contrast, his composition. You can almost see those children's eyes longing to be on the other side of the fence, but they're locked out, they're locked in, and they're locked down. Once again, he's beautifully showing the viciousness using his camera as a weapon. So you wonder what schools were like in the South. He shows you the school classroom for this town that every kid in that class from grade 1 to grade 6 had to be in this one classroom with a pot-belly stove. You look at the dilapidation of this space. Once again, showing the inequity, showing the ingrained inequalities in a society where we say we believe in liberty and justice for all. He humanizes the folk. One thing about Parks' work that I love is he gets close to people. He makes them real. It is as if you can sit on the porch with this family. In their poverty, their humanity shows bright. This loving couple that's endured and survived in a segregated South. So as Parks says, I picked up a camera because it was my choice of weapons against what I hated most about the universe: racism, intolerance, and poverty. Gordon Parks. Back to Ernest Withers, who I introduced you to earlier, who did the booklet on Emmett Till. The movement also showed not just the struggle, it also showed the victories. And here you see Dr. King and Dr. Abernathy sitting on the front of a bus in Montgomery, taken on December 21st, 1956. As the movement continues to move and the calendar moves, we jump to 1963, image by Fred Blackwell. And these are just students just like you trying to integrate a lunch counter to get something to eat. And look at the indignities they suffer. Look at all of the little white boys behind this integrated counter trying to just have something to drink, how they're humiliated. See, what civil rights photography did was, while these things happen on a daily basis, if you sat in the county, they would tell you that we don't feed colored folk here, we don't integrate here. But look how these folk treated folk, the evils of racism, the viciousness, the brutality is shown through these images. The Freedom Rides. Unknown photographer, Associated Press, May 20, 1962. I was born February 27, 1962. So part of what I want us to realize is this is an ancient history. I'm old enough to remember, not this year, but I was alive when this image was taken. That's interesting to me. Person on the left, of course, is the late, great Congressman John Lewis. They were just trying to ride a bus, integrated group of persons, brutally beaten. I would love to see this image in color, but even in black and white, it's powerful to see what happened to these folk. And this is what these photographers did. Now, they're shooting with short lenses. They're not long lenses. So they're right there. They're making you engage. They're close. They're not across the street. Because what they wanted you to feel that experience. They wanted to put you into what the people were actually feeling, what they were experiencing. So lens choice makes a difference, folk. If I'm using a Zoom and I'm across the street, it feels different if I'm using 35 or 24 or 16 or 21, and I'm right there where you got to feel what they're feeling. And the thing that really turns the tables in the movement was 1963 when they go to Birmingham, Alabama, and they meet the evil of Bull Connor, when Bull Connor let his dogs loose on people. Image taken by Bill Hudson on March 3rd, 1963, published in the May 3rd, 1963, published in the New York Times on May 4th, 1963. Why is this important? What happens is these images not only go local, they go national and international. Here you see a teenager being assaulted by dogs in America. And the dogs in the hands of police officers. Once again, Bill Hudson has a short lens. He's right there up on that engagement of this dog with these police officers and this young boy. And you can feel that dog's breath on that boy's body. You can feel that dog's teeth about to go into an American citizen's body simply for protesting for rights as a full American. I introduced you to Charles Moore back in Montgomery, Alabama. Now here's Charles Moore on the same day Bill Hudson's taking images, May 3rd, 1963. Once again, police officers letting dogs loose on American citizens. You see on the right of the frame, more photographers. Look at where they're at and look where Charles Moore is. Charles Moore is right by this man. Other photographers in their suits, in the fray, in the back. So where you position yourself, your lens choice makes a difference in how the viewer experiences the image. Once again, like Bill Hudson's image, I feel as if I'm right in front of this gentleman who's being attacked by these dogs. You can feel the dog. I can hear his pants ripping as the dog is pulling, as the police officer, paid by tax dollars, is letting a dog loose on an American citizen. But Charles Moore is right there in the fray. I'm going to show you this other image. Now in this image, that red circle, that's where Charles Moore, that's Charles Moore. One camera, one lens, in the middle of the action. Look where he's positioned himself. That's why when you engage Charles Moore's images, you feel as if you're there. That's why Charles Moore's images changes the conversation. Because you can't deny what you see. Because you feel what he shoots. Charles Moore. Charles Moore again. Bull Connor, once again, didn't let us down. Bull Connor, not only did he use dogs, he used fire hoses on teenagers. Look at where Charles Moore positions himself. He's right behind. He as if he is one of the firemen. But you can see how he's connecting that with that water hose hitting those children. These are teenagers. Once again, short lens. He's in close, in the fray. Now America has to look. You can't turn away from this viciousness. Why are they doing this? Because these folk want their freedom. That was promised to them in the 1800s. Y'all know when the Civil War was. We're now 100 years away from the Civil War, and we still can't vote. We still aren't free. We're still crying for Voting Rights Act. We're still crying for Civil Rights Act. So the movement's going since 1955. We're now in 1963. Charles Moore again. You can feel the pain of that water hose on that young boy's back. It's like a laser coming to his back. You can feel these young men trying to protect this young woman, helpless, being beat down by publicly paid officials simply for asking for freedom, asking for the right to vote, asking for protection from police and obvious vicious police brutality. But Charles Moore, once again, short lens, in close. You feel as if you're in the frame with these young people. It's like I'm right here or right there. You can feel it. So it's changing the conversation. America has to look. We're in May of 63. August of 1963, the March on Washington for jobs and justice and housing. I'm going to need a sleet image. Begins to capture, once again, civil black folk. Look at how they're dressed. Suits, ties. It's August, y'all. This is August in D.C. My daughter lives in D.C. It's not cool in D.C. in August. It's hot. It's humid, right? But because we had to present dignity, right, as we're protesting for rights, look how they are dressed. But then look at this image that Monita Sleep captures. He gives you the sense of the power of the crowd marching towards the Lincoln Memorial. He captures in this image the leaders of the movement, this integrated leaders of the movement, both white and black, of labor and civil rights. You see on the very left of the frame, you see John Lewis, you see Martin King in the middle, you see Whitney Young on the right, you see A. Randolph, you see all of these great leaders in this frame. So he's showing you how this support for the movement is beginning to rally and to grow. As they're pushing for 64 and 65, we're trying to get a Voting Rights Act and a Civil Rights Act. But then, September. Bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. 14 injured, 4 little girls murdered. We're now back to the beginning, aren't we? We're back to 1955. Remember? A 14-year-old boy brutally murdered by the hands of vicious racists who were set free by a kangaroo court. And America says no more. When Emmett Till Bradley published the images of Emmett Till, monies began to come in to civil rights organizations like rain was falling down. A movement was born. And from 1955 to 1963, the movement inched along. We made minor gains in cities and states, but we had not yet gotten national legislation. So we marched on Washington in August of 1963. I'm 1 year old now. I'm probably crawling and running my parents crazy. But here we are, a year later. The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. 4 little girls dead. And once again, the vicious racists who commit the crime go free. But the image, the AP photo published September 15, 1963, would be another movement, another major move in the movement. Because with these images from Birmingham, this 16th Baptist Church was also in Birmingham. Actually, this church was the headquarters church that the students marched out of. And right across from this church was the park. You saw the students being bitten by dogs and water hoses sprayed on them. This is within a one block area. So this is the left side of 16th Street Baptist Church, and the park is on right across the street out of the front of the church. This is the side of the church, side back of the church. This gave the movement the ability to argue for and get successfully passed the 1964-65 Civil Rights Act, 64 Voting Rights Act in 1965. Once again, you cannot deny what happened in this church. The evidence is there via the still image. James Spider Martin, another famous photographer who was known for his size, very small, supposedly could get in and out of corners and climb up trees, etc. Once again, I want you to see in this image where the state troopers are confronting John Lewis and Hosea Williams in the front of this image. But you see across, some photographers staying way back. Once again, Spider Martin, much like Charles Moore, is right there in the frame, bringing you front and center. And look at the composition of this image. He shows you what we're fighting against. We're fighting against the evils of segregation manifested in legal entities, here the police, versus these well-dressed, mild-mannered persons simply saying, we want our rights to vote. Because even as these laws were passed, the states were supposed to move with all deliberate speed, but states were reluctant to respond to national legislation. So we're still fighting for our rights. And so James Spider Martin was there on what we call Bloody Sunday as they're attempting to march from Selma to Montgomery. He captures the fallout, the brutality of police. We're still talking about today the brutality of police, and what they did to persons simply marching for their rights. Spider Martin. We fast forward, 1968. Once again, Ernest Withers, introduced you to him earlier in this talk. When garbage workers were just saying, I'm a man, I'm fighting for my rights, as African Americans had been killed when the rainstorm came and they were in the cab, in the belly of a garbage truck, and they closed it up and these people were actually killed. And they're marching for their rights. Ernest Withers captured this image. Actually, Professor Joshua Shaw McFadden has expanded this work and reconnect with some of those who were in these original images that were taken, the original strikers for the garbage workers. And King was there, fighting for their rights as well. Also, where he was assassinated. And Joseph Lowe captured this image in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4th, 1968. Once again, we began with a murder, and we ended with a murder. But the photographers, they caught it, told the story. And of course, America erupted because the drum major for justice, the king of love, was killed, brutally murdered. But Joseph Lowe was there to capture the image. America had to confront that reality and if ever change the country.